What is the most disturbing fact you know of? In the 1980s, Bayer, the pharmaceutical company, created a hemophilia drug using human blood. The blood they used to create it was tainted with HIV, meaning it could transmit the virus to patients that use it. Bayer decided that destroying the drugs would be too financially damaging and instead distributed the drugs to developing countries in Asia and South America, infecting tens of thousands of patients with HIV. They settled for 600 meters, which gave each patient approximately $100,000. $100,000 for being infected with HIV. Some people don't hear their voice, or anything, when they think to themselves. I was in college and at a large group, all learning how to be teaching fellows, glorified tutors, and the speaker asked us by a show of hands to indicate if we hear ourselves in our heads when we think. Most people raised their hands, but some did not. And each group was completely blown away at the existence of the other group. Like I couldn't fathom what that meant to not hear your voice. How do you think? And that minority couldn't fathom us hearing anything in our heads. Crazy. I saw this old video comparing 1-year-olds and how they reacted to their environment, specifically toys laid out in front of them. The kids that had been in happy and stable homes were curious about the toys and would play with them, put them in their mouths, general baby stuff. But the ones that were in unstable, unhappy homes were scared to even touch the toys and kept looking around with worried facial expressions. It was heartbreaking to see the difference, and it really shows that the home you grow up in has a huge impact on your life. During the late Roman Republic, one of the richest men in Rome, Marcus Licinius Crassus, used to own a team of firefighters. There was no dedicated firefighter service at the time. If your building was burning, he would offer to buy the building. If you agreed, he put out the fire. If not, his team of firefighters just left and let the building burn. In 1859, the Carrington Event happened. This was a massive solar flare that caused sparks and fires from telegraph systems and made the night sky so bright birds began signing and gold miners started prepping breakfast because they thought it was morning. Skies all over the planet erupted in red, green, and purple auroras so bright that one could read the newspaper as if it were daylight. For the people of the time, the telegraph shocks, sparks, and fires were the extent of the damage. However, we now live in an age dependent on electricity and digital things, and if the same level of flare were to happen today, the world would simultaneously lose GPS, cell networks, and most of the power grid. Every airplane in the sky would need to coordinate a mass grounding without satellite guidance. Most likely the only way most of us would figure out what happened would be the newspaper the next day. This would be a WMD level event happened across the entire planet. Any astronauts who might be spacewalking would be in trouble, and even in the ISS, NASA only says they probably have adequate shielding inside, but would have precious little time to get inside. The best NASA estimates are this would cost humanity $1 to $2 trillion in the first year alone, and would likely take 4 to 10 years to fully recover from the damages. Included in this would be replacing many satellites that would be fried. Luckily, every part of the sun is being constantly watched by scientists, so we would see it coming. But we would have only a few minutes of warning from the moment the flare happens to when it hits our planet. Not necessarily the worst fact, but there is still one body never found after Chernobyl. Valery Kodomchuk is considered to be the first person to perish in the disaster, as he was closest to the explosion when it occurred. His body is presumed to be under the circulation pumps, but could also have very well been vaporized in the explosion. One of Jeffrey Dahmer's most notable killings was that of Conrad Synthesomphone, a 14-year-old Lao boy. He lured the boy into his apartment, where he repeatedly drugged and assaulted him, and even drilled a hole into his skull. Conrad escaped, and sought the help of women on the sidewalk who called 911. However, Dahmer was able to convince the police that he was his boyfriend and they simply had a lover's quarrel. When the women tried to intervene, the officers quite literally told them to shut the hell up. Officers briefly searched Dahmer's apartment, and even peeked inside his bedroom before deciding there was nothing more to investigate. Little did they know, the rotting corpse of John Hughes, another one of Dahmer's victims, was laying behind the bed, just out of eyesight. The officers returned Conrad to Dahmer and called it a day. The boy was killed a few hours later. The most disturbing part of this is how close Dahmer was to being caught, how a cop was inches away from one of his murders, and how they willingly let this young boy be brutally tortured and murdered. Read a story in an old newspaper once, about this girl, 12, who was asking for money to do a surgery. She was the only survivor of a shipwreck and lost a good chunk of her leg in it. That is why she needed the surgery, to be able to keep her leg from being amputated. The crazy thing is the motive for her leg to be amputated. During the rescue, she shouted for the rescuers to be careful pulling her up from the water because a fish had bitten her on the leg. It wasn't a fish, it was another little girl, 6 years old, dead, still attached to her leg by the nails. It's only a matter of time before a massive glacier in Antarctica, Thwaites, collapses, and if it takes out the surrounding ice sheet it could cause 2 meters of sea level rise overnight. There's no preventing it at this point, and every time scientists measure it they find it's melting faster than they realized. In 2019 they found it has a cavity 2/3 the size of Manhattan that had formed in under 3 years. There was a time when babies were operated on without anesthetics. It was believed that their nervous system wasn't developed enough to feel pain. Always have to reply when I see this one. I had a coarctation repair, heart surgery, at 21 days old back when this was the practice. My mother always said that I had no anesthesia, and I just figured that she didn't hear that right. Found out on Reddit that she did. Of course I have no memory of it, just a big scar as a reminder. Would love to know what the long-term effects of this are. I think I'm pretty normal, but so do a lot of people who shouldn't. Smile. Bacteria antibiotic resistance is on a whole other level. Even in the 13 years I've been in a medical microbiology lab, antibiotic resistance has really become rampant. It's not going to stop either. The bacteria multiply and evolve so quickly that even the most effective bombacillins will become obsolete. We are going to reach a breaking point where even things like a simple cut or a sinus infection could become life-threatening. Don't take antibiotics like a Z-Pak for a cold. It's most likely viral and the antibiotics are just superfluous. If you are prescribed antibiotics, finish them. Edit. Wow, I'm amazed at how much this response blew up. Thanks for the rewards everyone. I'm glad a lab rat like myself I could spark some discussion about antibiotic stewardship. Stay safe out there everyone. I'm an RN and several years ago I was doing a travel assignment and I was assigned an admission from a long-term care facility. The patient had previously had a brainstem stroke and had been believed to be in a persistent vegetative state since the stroke many months prior. When I was researching the patient I saw that all of his imaging was essentially normal, aside from the brainstem, obviously, and that his EEG studies were unremarkable and even seemed to show normal sleep/wake patterns. I mentioned this to one of the doctors that was working in the unit with me and he got kind of awkward when I asked about that. He basically said that he had seen that patient a few times and that he believed the patient had basically intact cognitive function but that the family was resistant to changing his code status and wouldn't permit any further imaging or intervention. He had a PEG tube and a suprapubic catheter. One or the other would occasionally cause the patient to become septic, and that was the only real interventions that the family would allow is for us to deal with those types of situations. That patient was what is referred to as locked in. That is to say his body basically didn't work but his brain absolutely did. He was likely 100% aware of everything around him but lacked any ability to let anyone know that or express his own wishes in any meaningful way. The idea that this can be someone's fate is absolutely disturbing to me, and the fact the family knew this and willfully ignored it seems cruel to me, bordering on evil.